The blood-red sun cast long shadows over the desolate plains of Colorado Territory as Naomi Rayburn clutched the weathered letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her husband of 6 years was never coming home. The mining accident that had claimed Thomas's life had left her alone with nothing but debts and whispers following her every move through the streets of Silver Creek. It was the spring of 1874, and life for a widow in the West was unforgiving at best. At 24, Naomi was considered damaged goods by the townsfolk who once welcomed her with open arms. The rumors began shortly after Thomas's death, whispers that he'd gambled away their savings, that he'd been caught with another woman in the next town over, that his death was somehow divine retribution. None of it was true, but truth rarely survived the hunger for gossip in a frontier town. Naomi stood on the porch of what had been their modest home, staring at the eviction notice nailed to the door. The bank had finally come calling, and she had nowhere to go. Her auburn hair, once meticulously pinned, now hung loose around her shoulders as she gathered what little remained of her possessions into a threadbare carpetbag. "Mighty shame what's become of you, Mrs. Rayburn," drawled Horace Jenkins, the town banker, as he approached with 2 deputies flanking him. "But business is business, and your husband's debts ain't paying themselves." "I've asked for more time," Naomi replied, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "Just another month to sell some of Thomas's equipment. Time's up." Jenkins cut her off. "Town councils made their decision. You've got till sundown." The streets grew quiet as Naomi made her way through town, her shoulders squared despite the weight of the townspeople's stares. Doors closed as she passed. Conversations hushed to whispers. Even Martha Henley, who had taken tea with Naomi every Sunday for the past 5 years, turned away when their eyes met across the general store. "Where will you go?" asked the storekeeper's wife, one of the few who still acknowledged her existence. "I don't know," Naomi admitted. "My family's back east, but I haven't the means to get there." By dusk, Naomi found herself at the edge of town, seated on her carpetbag beneath the gnarled branches of an old cottonwood tree. The spring air carried a chill as darkness fell, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Tomorrow she would need to find work, shelter, something, but tonight, exhaustion claimed her thoughts. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused her from her misery. A lone rider appeared on the road, his silhouette backlit by the rising moon. Naomi tensed, reaching for the small knife she kept in her pocket. Women alone on the frontier learned caution quickly. The horse slowed as it approached, and Naomi could make out the broad shoulders of the rider. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and even in the darkness, she could see the dust of the trail coating his duster. "Evening, madam," the man said, his voice deep but gentle. "Might I ask what brings a lady to be sitting by the roadside at this hour?" Naomi hesitated before answering. "Circumstances beyond my control, sir." The man dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. As he stepped closer, the moonlight revealed a face weathered by sun and wind, but kind. He couldn't have been more than 30, with eyes that held none of the judgment she'd grown accustomed to in town. "Quinn Everett," he introduced himself, tipping his hat. "Most folks call me Quinn." "Naomi Rayburn," she replied, still wary. Recognition flickered across his face. "Thomas Rayburn's widow?" Naomi's shoulders sagged. Here it came, the judgment, the contempt, the hurried departure. "Yes," she said simply. To her surprise, Quinn's expression softened further. "I knew Thomas. Good man. Helped me break a wild Mustang once when nobody else would get near the beast. Said he learned from his pa back in Kentucky." Naomi felt tears prick at her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had spoken kindly of Thomas. "The town's turned you out?" Quinn asked, glancing at her carpetbag. She nodded, unwilling to elaborate on her humiliation. Quinn was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here. Nothing fancy, but there's a house. Been empty since my sister moved back to Illinois last fall." "I couldn't possibly," Naomi began. "It's sitting there gathering dust," Quinn interrupted. "You'd be doing me a favor, keeping it lived in while I'm out with the cattle." Naomi studied his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. She found none. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. Quinn shrugged. "Way I see it, we're all just one bad turn from needing help ourselves. Besides, like I said, I knew Thomas. He'd have done the same." Before she could form a response, Quinn had lifted her carpetbag and secured it to his saddle. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes, but then we best get moving before it gets any later. Coyotes get mighty curious after dark." With little choice and nowhere else to go, Naomi allowed Quinn to help her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance as he guided the animal eastward into the night. The ranch appeared on the horizon just as the first light of dawn broke across the sky. It was modest compared to some of the sprawling operations Naomi had seen, but well maintained. A 2-story house stood amid several outbuildings, with corrals and a barn nearby. The land stretched out in rolling hills, dotted with cattle in the distance. "Home sweet home," Quinn said as they approached. "At least for now." The house was simple but clean, with a kitchen, parlor, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. A layer of dust covered most surfaces, but otherwise it was in good order. "My sister kept it nice," Quinn explained as he showed Naomi around. "She moved back east after her husband passed. Couldn't stand the quiet out here anymore." "I'm sorry for her loss," Naomi said sincerely. Quinn nodded. "Life out here takes as much as it gives. Anyway, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. I've got a bunkhouse out back where I stay most nights when I'm not out with the herd." "I can't accept charity," Naomi said firmly. "I'll work for my keep." A smile tugged at the corner of Quinn's mouth. "Fair enough. Place could use a woman's touch. And I wouldn't turn down a hot meal now and then that wasn't cooked over a campfire." That first day, Naomi slept for hours, the exhaustion of the past weeks finally catching up to her. When she woke, she found fresh water in a bucket outside her door and a basket containing bread, dried meat, and a jar of preserves. A note in Quinn's rough handwriting explained he'd be back by sundown. True to his word, Quinn returned as the sun was setting. Naomi had spent the afternoon cleaning the kitchen and preparing a simple meal from the provisions he'd left. They ate together at the small table, conversation sparse but comfortable. Days turned into weeks as spring deepened. Naomi threw herself into making the empty house a home again. She planted a garden with seeds Quinn brought from town, repaired linens she found in a trunk, and cooked meals that brought color back to both their cheeks. For his part, Quinn kept a respectful distance, never entering the house without announcing himself first, always treating her with a courtesy she'd forgotten existed. Word of Naomi's new living arrangement reached Silver Creek quickly. The gossip that followed was predictable and cruel. When Quinn rode into town for supplies, he heard the whispers. "Taken up with the Rayburn widow, has he? Always knew she was no better than she ought to be. Poor Thomas barely cold in his grave." Quinn ignored them all, loading his wagon with the supplies Naomi had requested along with a bolt of blue calico he thought might match her eyes. It wasn't until the general store owner made a lewd comment about payment arrangements that Quinn's patience snapped. "Mrs. Rayburn is under my protection," he said, his voice low but carrying enough for everyone in the store to hear. "She's a decent woman who's been wronged by this town, and anyone who says different will answer to me. Understood." The store fell silent, and Quinn left with his purchases, the air around him practically crackling with anger. He didn't mention the incident to Naomi when he returned, simply handing her the supplies with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But Naomi knew something had happened. "They're talking, aren't they? About me staying here." Quinn hesitated before nodding. "People talk. It's what they do when they've got nothing better to occupy their minds." "I should leave," Naomi said quietly. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "You're not trouble," Quinn replied firmly. "And I don't much care what people think. Never have." As summer approached, Naomi found herself looking forward to the evenings when Quinn would return from his work. They'd sit on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Sometimes he'd tell stories of his travels, of the years he spent driving cattle north to the railheads in Kansas. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, each content with the other's company. One evening in late June, as a thunderstorm gathered on the horizon, Quinn returned earlier than usual, leading a chestnut mare behind his own horse. "Got you something," he said, a rare nervousness in his voice. "Figured you might like some freedom to come and go as you please." Naomi approached the mare slowly, running her hand along its neck. "She's beautiful." "Her name's Penny," Quinn said. "Gentle disposition, but she's got spirit when needed. Like someone else I know." Their eyes met over the horse's back, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing quietly all these weeks. The storm broke before either could speak, sending them rushing for the shelter of the house. Rain pounded against the roof as they stood dripping in the kitchen, breathless and laughing. "Thank you," Naomi said finally, "for Penny, for everything." Quinn stepped closer, hesitant. "Naomi." A crash of thunder interrupted him, making them both jump. The moment passed, but something had changed. Both felt it, neither quite ready to name it. July brought scorching heat and the cattle drive Quinn had been preparing for. He would be gone for nearly 3 weeks, taking his herd to the railroad at Pueblo for shipment east. "Will you be all right here alone?" he asked the night before his departure. "I'll be fine," Naomi assured him. "I've got Penny if I need anything from town, and enough supplies to last until winter." Quinn nodded, but concern still creased his brow. "If there's trouble, the Hendersons are the closest neighbors, about 4 miles west. Good people." "Quinn," Naomi said softly, placing her hand on his arm, "I'll be here when you get back. I promise." The touch of her hand sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I'll hold you to that," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. The house felt impossibly empty after Quinn left with his men and cattle the next morning. Naomi busied herself with chores, but the silence pressed in around her. She hadn't realized how accustomed she'd grown to his presence, to the sound of his boots on the porch, his deep voice calling her name. On the 4th day after Quinn's departure, Naomi decided to ride into town for some fabric to make new curtains. It would be her first time back in Silver Creek since the day they'd forced her out. With Penny saddled and her chin held high, she made the journey. The town had changed little in the months she'd been gone. The same dusty Main Street, the same buildings baking in the summer sun. People stopped to stare as she rode past, conversations halting mid-sentence. Naomi ignored them, dismounting in front of the general store with as much dignity as she could muster. Inside, the storekeeper's wife served her with cool politeness, neither friendly nor outright hostile. Naomi selected her fabric and was about to pay when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Rayburn. Heard you'd found yourself a new protector." Horace Jenkins stood there, flanked by 2 of the town councilmen. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Jenkins," Naomi acknowledged with a slight nod. "I'm just here for some fabric. Fixing up Everett's place, are you? Making yourself comfortable in his bed?" The storekeeper's wife gasped, and several other customers murmured disapprovingly. Naomi's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. Mr. Everett has been kind enough to provide me shelter when this town turned its back on me. That's all. That's not what I hear, Jenkins pressed. I hear you're earning your keep in ways that would make your poor dead husband turn in his grave. Something snapped inside Naomi. Months of grief, humiliation, and anger boiled over. My husband was a good man who worked himself to death trying to provide for our future. He believed in this town, in its people, and you repaid that faith by spreading lies about him and casting me out when I was at my lowest. Mr. Everett showed me more decency in one night than this entire town has in years. The store had gone completely silent. Naomi placed her money on the counter, gathered her fabric, and walked out with her head high. She was halfway to Penny when Jenkins followed her out. You owe this town money, Mrs. Rayburn, he called after her. Your husband's debts didn't disappear just because you found yourself a cowboy to warm your bed. Naomi turned slowly. My husband owed the bank, Mr. Jenkins, not the town. And when you seized our home and sold our possessions, that debt was more than covered. You know it as well as I do. That's not how I calculate it, Jenkins replied, his face reddening. Maybe we should pay a visit to that ranch, see what Everett has to say about harboring a debtor. I wouldn't advise that, came another voice. Martha Henley, Naomi's former friend, stepped forward from the gathering crowd. Horace Jenkins, you should be ashamed. We all should. Thomas Rayburn was a fine man, and Naomi was nothing but a good wife to him. What I did was wrong. Jenkins spluttered, but Martha wasn't finished. You know very well the Rayburn's property sold for more than the loan amount. The council voted to use the difference for the new schoolhouse rather than return it to Naomi, and we all just went along with it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked away in shame. Others nodded in agreement with Martha. Is this true? Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jenkins's silence was answer enough. The ride back to the ranch was a blur. Naomi's mind raced with the revelation that not only had the town turned against her, but they had actually stolen from her. The money from the sale of her home should have been hers enough to start over somewhere, perhaps even return east to her family. She was still sitting on the porch, lost in thought, when riders approached just before dusk. Martha Henley dismounted from a wagon, followed by several other women from town. They carried baskets and bundles. Naomi, Martha called, approaching hesitantly. May we speak with you? Warily, Naomi stood. What is it you want, Martha? To apologize, the older woman said, genuine remorse in her eyes. What happened today in town? It made a lot of us realize how poorly we've treated you. We've brought some things: food, fabric, preserves. It's not much, but it's a start. I don't need charity, Naomi said stiffly. It's not charity, Martha replied. It's the beginning of making amends. The town council will be meeting tomorrow to discuss repaying what rightfully belongs to you from the sale of your home. Naomi's defenses began to crumble. Why now? Why did it take so long for anyone to speak up? Fear, said another woman, stepping forward. Fear and shame. It was easier to believe the rumors than to face the truth that any one of us could end up in your situation if fate turned against us. That night, after the women had gone, Naomi sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying to process everything that had happened. The town's betrayal still stung, but Martha's intervention had opened a door to possible reconciliation. Still, it was Quinn's ranch that felt like home now, not Silver Creek. The thought of Quinn brought a warmth to her chest that had become familiar. In the months since he'd brought her here, something had changed between them. What had begun as charity had evolved into friendship, and now it was something deeper, something neither had put into words. 2 more weeks passed before Quinn returned. Naomi spotted the dust cloud of the approaching riders from the porch and felt her heart leap in her chest. She smoothed her dress, a new one she'd made from the blue calico he'd brought her, and waited, trying to contain her excitement. Quinn rode ahead of his men, his face breaking into a broad smile when he saw her waiting. He dismounted in a fluid motion, removing his hat as he approached. "You're still here," he said, his voice carrying a note of relief. "I promised I would be," Naomi replied softly. They stood for a moment, drinking in the sight of each other after weeks apart. Quinn looked thinner, his skin darker from weeks in the sun, but his eyes were bright as they took her in. "You look," he started, then shook his head with a smile. "The blue suits you." That evening, after Quinn had settled his men and the cattle, they sat together on the porch. Naomi told him about her confrontation in town and Martha's subsequent visit. "So they finally found their conscience," Quinn said, a hint of anger in his voice. "Took them long enough." "Martha says the council voted to repay me," Naomi said. "It would be enough for me to go wherever I wanted." Quinn stiffened beside her. "And where is it you want to go?" Naomi turned to look at him, taking in the tension in his jaw, the carefully neutral expression he was trying to maintain. "That depends," she said carefully. "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay." The air between them seemed to still. Quinn set his coffee cup down and turned to face her fully. "Naomi," he began, his voice low and earnest, "when I found you that night by the road, I just wanted to help. I never thought I'd feel this way again." "What way?" she whispered, though she knew had known for weeks. "Like I'd found something I didn't even know I was missing." Quinn reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I love you, Naomi. I think I have almost from the beginning. But I need you to know I don't expect anything. If you want to leave to start fresh somewhere else, I'll understand." Naomi felt tears prick at her eyes. "The night Thomas died, I thought my life was over. When the town turned against me, I was sure of it. But then you came along and gave me shelter, gave me time to heal. Somewhere along the way, this place became home." She squeezed his hand. "You became home. Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Quinn asked, hope lighting his features. "I'm saying I love you too, Quinn Everett. And if you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Not as your charity case, not as your housekeeper, but as my wife." Quinn finished, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi's breath caught. "Is that what you want?" In answer, Quinn gently pulled her to her feet and dropped to one knee before her. "Naomi Rayburn, I've spent my life wandering, never feeling settled anywhere for long. But with you, I feel like I've finally found where I belong. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled freely down Naomi's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she managed through the emotion tightening her throat. "Yes, I will." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. To Naomi's surprise, half the town showed up, led by Martha Henley. The town council presented her with the money owed from the sale of her home, which she and Quinn decided to use to expand the ranch. Fall came, painting the landscape in golds and reds. Naomi and Quinn settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The house that had once stood empty was now filled with laughter, conversation, and love. One crisp October evening, they sat wrapped in a quilt on the porch, watching the sunset. Quinn's arm was around Naomi's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Do you ever think about how we met?" Naomi asked. "How different our lives would be if you hadn't ridden by that night?" Quinn's arm tightened around her. "I think about it all the time. Some might call it chance, but I call it fate. The town that turned me away gave me the greatest gift in the end," Naomi mused. "It led me to you." And this empty ranch house isn't empty anymore, Quinn added, pressing a kiss to her temple. As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, talking of the future of the children they hoped for, the years they would share, the life they would build together. The wounds of the past hadn't disappeared, but they had healed, leaving scars that reminded them both of their strength and the unexpected joy that can follow despair. The town of Silver Creek had turned its back on a widow in her time of need, but in doing so had set her on a path to find not just shelter, but love in the arms of a cowboy with an empty ranch house and a heart big enough to change both their lives forever.